Montana Territory, August 1877. The gunfire had stopped hours ago, but the smell of blood and gunpowder still clung to the trees outside Alder Creek. Abigail Carter crouched low behind a thick pine, her breath tight in her chest, eyes locked on the man bleeding into the dirt just beyond the ridge. He should have been dead. 3 bullets in him, one through the shoulder, one in the leg, and one grazing his ribs. But he was still breathing barely. Abigail had found him by accident, taking the long trail home from the trading post when she spotted his dark coat against the pale summer grass. A wanted man. She recognized his face from the posters nailed up at the general store in town. Jacob Lorne, stagecoach robber, armed and dangerous. Reward, $500. She should have turned and walked away. Instead, she had climbed down to him, brushing flies from his face, pressing her palm to the worst of the wounds. His skin had burned under her touch. He had tried to speak, but blood spilled from the corner of his mouth before he passed out again. Now, night was creeping in fast. The wind was rising, and already she could hear wolves in the distance. If she left him here, he would not last the night. Abigail was no fool. She lived alone, far from town, in a cabin her late husband built before the fever took him 2 winters ago. She had no children, no family nearby, just a quiet life and a small garden. Trouble had passed her by until now. She stared at him a moment longer. Then she gathered the hem of her skirt, stepped forward, and whispered, "You better not make me regret this." It took everything she had to get him onto her mule. Jacob groaned once as she tied him down, the rope slick with blood. The ride back to her cabin took over an hour, and by the time she lowered him onto her bed, she was shaking with exhaustion. She worked through the night, boiled water, cleaned the wounds, sewed him up. He never woke. At dawn, his fever broke. At noon, he opened his eyes. His voice was rough. "You should have left me." Abigail stood at the stove, pouring broth into a tin cup. "I thought about it." He blinked slowly, taking in the worn walls, the crackling fire, the rifle propped in the corner. "Why didn't you?" She crossed the room and sat beside him, pressing the cup to his lips. "Because dying out there like an animal is no kind of death. And because I'm not like the people chasing you." He drank, then studied her. "You know who I am." "I do." "You scared?" No, he looked surprised by that. Not by the fact that she knew his name, but by her calm, her stillness, like she had already made peace with whatever came next. "What's your name?" he asked finally. "Abigail Carter." "Abigail." He said it like he was testing the sound of it. "You live here alone?" "I do." "You got a death wish, helping someone like me?" She gave a small shake of her head. "I do not plan on dying today." He washed her hands as she set the cup down. They were steady, calloused from work. Not soft, but not cruel either. "You are going to need to leave by tomorrow," she said. "If I get caught with you here, they'll hang me next to you." He nodded. "Fair." Then he slept again. When she woke the next morning, he was gone. The bed was empty, the linens stained red. The door stood wide open, a trail of bloodied prints leading into the woods. She stood in the doorway for a long time, the silence pressing in hard. No note, no goodbye, just gone. Until she heard the knock. Abigail spun, heart kicking once hard against her ribs. He stood on the porch, hat in his hands, shirt clean, wounds freshly wrapped. He looked like he had bathed in the creek, maybe even shaved. His coat was gone, replaced by a plain linen shirt open at the collar, revealing the bandage across his chest. But it was not his face that held her attention. It was the small leather pouch in his hand. "I owe you," he said, voice low. She stared at him. He pressed the pouch into her palm. It was heavy. The drawstrings were damp from his hand, but inside the leather, she felt the unmistakable weight of gold coins. "I do not want your gold," she said, trying to push it back. "I want you to have it," Jacob said, "for saving my life. I did not do it for money." "I know." His voice gentled. "But take it anyway. You earned it." She hesitated, then slowly closed her fingers around the pouch. "What now?" He looked down at her, his eyes clearer now, steadier. "I could leave. Keep running. But I do not want to." Abigail felt her breath catch. "I do not have much," he said. "But I have enough to start over. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere far. And I would not mind if you wanted to come with me." She stared at him, her heart thudding in her chest. "You are serious?" "I am." She looked at his face, the rough edges, the wear, the truth in his eyes. She had not felt anything in 2 years. No pull, no warmth. But right now, standing on her porch with the sun rising behind him, Something stirred deep in her chest. "Why me?" she asked. He stepped closer. "Because you were the first person in a long time who looked at me like I was still a man." The pouch of gold hung heavy in her hand. She looked past him, out to the trees, the hills, the quiet road winding away from everything she had ever known. Then she looked back at him, and she smiled. The boots beside her door were too clean for a man who'd been gunshot 2 days prior. Abigail noticed it before anything else that his laces were tied firm and even, his socks matched, and the scuffs had been polished out. He hadn't just walked back to her cabin. He'd made a decision before he came. She stepped back, letting him cross the threshold without a word. He removed his hat, held it low at his side, and waited until she latched the door behind them. Morning light filtered through the chinked logs, soft across the plank floor. Jacob didn't sit. Instead, he stood near the hearth, glancing at the table, the stove, the knife still drying on the windowsill. "I left my horse tied near the stream," he said. "Found a patch of wild mint. Smelled like something worth remembering." She crossed to the stove and poured water into the tin basin, careful not to look at him too directly. "You must be feeling better. Enough to stand, not enough to run." Her hands paused over the basin. The water rippled. She turned then and met his eyes. "You said you didn't want to keep running." "I meant it." He didn't waver under her gaze. His face was drawn, but steadier than before. The pallor had faded. His shoulders had lost some of their tension. She dried her hands on her apron. "You have a plan?" "Not much of one yet," he admitted. "But I know where not to go. I know what kind of life I don't want anymore." Abigail moved to the cupboard and pulled down 2 tin plates, setting them on the table without speaking. He waited. "I kept to myself," she said finally. "After Nathan died, I thought quiet was enough. I thought, if I just worked and kept breathing, something would come back." He stepped closer. "Did it?" "No, not until I found you bleeding in the grass." His breath caught, just slightly. He looked down at the scarred floorboards, then back up at her. "I can't offer you safety," he said. "Not yet, but I can offer the truth. I don't want to live like I did before. I want to build something, even if it's small, even if it's hard." She sat down at the table, gesturing to the second chair. He took it. "You don't know me, Jacob." "Not really. I know you carried me when I couldn't stand. I know you stayed up all night sewing my skin shut. I know you didn't ask for anything." She looked at him, quiet and still. "Then, I buried my sister when I was 16. Fever came through Helena, took our mother first. I didn't cry for either of them. I just kept going. Nathan was the only one who ever made me stop long enough to feel anything again." Jacob's brow furrowed, but he didn't speak. "I'm telling you this," she continued, "because if you want to build something with me, you need to know I don't scare easy. But I don't follow men into darkness, either. You want a future, you better be ready to earn it." He nodded once. "I am." She stood and crossed to the stove, lifting the kettle. "Then you can start by helping me fix the roof. There's a leak over the pantry shelf." He rose, slow but steady. "Show me where." By midday, they'd cleared the ladder from the shed and hauled shingles from the lean-to. Abigail climbed first, nimble in her boots, keeping her weight low. He followed, wincing once as the wound in his side pulled taut. They worked in quiet rhythm, passing nails, holding boards. No idle chatter passed between them. But when their hands brushed, she didn't pull away. Later, sitting on the porch, she handed him a tin mug of willow bark tea. He took it with a nod, his fingers brushing the rim before he drank. "I used to think the world was made of men like the ones who came for me," he said. "Sheriffs who don't care why you ran. Bankers who never get their hands dirty. And now," he looked at her, "I steady. Now I think maybe there's still room for something better. For someone better." She didn't answer. She just leaned back against the post, the warmth of the sun on her face, her body finally still. He finished the tea, set the mug beside her boot. "I'm gonna stay nearby," he said. "Not here, not yet, but close enough to be of use. If you change your mind, I'll be within a half-day's ride." She turned her face toward him. "You'll be back tomorrow." He hesitated. "You think so? I know it." He tipped his head, then stepped off the porch, boots soft in the dust. She watched him until the trees swallowed him whole. Then she went inside and cleared a space in the root cellar, just in case they needed a place to hide come winter. The first frost crept in before the leaves had finished turning. Mornings came thin and pale, the light less gold, the air cut with wood smoke. Abigail rose earlier than usual, fingers stiff with cold as she fed the stove and cracked ice from the water bucket. She'd taken to keeping a second plate on the table, though she never said it unless she knew he was coming. Jacob didn't return every day, but every few days, near dusk, she'd catch the soft crunch of hoofbeats through pine needles. He never stayed the night. He never crossed the invisible line she hadn't drawn, but he seemed to understand. But he worked quietly, steadily clearing brush, digging a trench behind the house for runoff, splitting the last cords of wood. He never asked to be fed, but she fed him. He never asked to come in, but when she left the door open, he stepped through. One late afternoon, long after the sun had dropped behind the ridge, he lingered near the barn, hands wrapped in twine as he lashed a bundle of kindling. Abigail stood beside the fence mending a broken rail. Her skirts brushed the frost-bitten grass, breath rising in small clouds. "Man passed me on the road out of Gallatin," Jacob said, knotting the twine with practiced fingers. Said the sheriff's looking east now, toward the Dakota line. She didn't answer right away, just pressed the hammer to the nail and drove it in with a sharp crack. "Then, that mean you're safer here?" "No, but it means I've got time." She straightened, brushing splinters from her palm. "Time for what?" He glanced toward the tree line. "To figure out what a quiet life looks like." She leaned against the rail, the sky deepening behind her. "You ever live one before?" "Not once." She studied his profile, how he watched the horizon like it might turn on him. "Then how do you know you'd be any good at it?" "I don't," he said. "But I want to learn." There was no weight in his voice, no plea. Just plain truth, laid bare in the cooling air between them. She looked back toward the house. The window glowed warm. "If you stay through the first snow, you'll need better boots." He lifted his eyes to hers. "You offering me a place?" "I'm offering you a test." His mouth twitched, not in amusement, but something heavier. "You think I'll fail?" "I think you're used to running. Standing still might be the harder thing." That night, he didn't ride off. He unlatched the gate, led his horse into the lean-to, and spread his bedroll in the loft above the barn. In the dark, she heard him moving slow, quiet, respectful of the space he'd been allowed. She didn't sleep until she saw the lantern go out beneath the slats. In the days that followed, he didn't rush. He didn't push. He asked where the fence line ended, where the brook ran dry, where the trap line was set. He patched the floorboard in the pantry and repaired the shutter that had hung crooked since spring. When he spoke, he asked things no one had asked her in years. "Did you always live out here?" "No," she said, brushing flour from her apron. "But I always knew I'd end up somewhere like this." "Why?" "Because I don't mind the quiet." Never did. One evening, as the wind turned sharp and the clouds thickened with snow, she found him sitting on the porch steps, a piece of tanned hide in his hands. He'd cut it into strips, weaving them into a simple strap. She sat down beside him, a wool shawl wrapped around her shoulders. The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't empty. "What's it for?" she asked, nodding to the leather. "Something to carry a blade in. The one you keep tucked in your boots too loose." She looked at him sideways. "You been watching my boots?" He didn't look away. "I watch everything that matters." She let out a slow breath, the cold biting at her throat. "You think I matter?" His answer didn't come in words. It came in the way he set the strap down gently between them, in the way his hand found hers, rough palm against her calluses, warm even in the chill. She didn't pull away. "I keep thinking," he said, voice low, "about what kind of man I want to be when the snow comes. If I'm still standing here, if you're still letting me hold your hand, then maybe I'll know I've done something right." She turned her face toward his. The porch creaked beneath them. A crow called out from the far trees. "You're not the only one learning how to stand still," she said. Neither of them moved. The wind tugged at her shawl. His thumb brushed the edge of her palm. "Just once." Inside, the fire burned low. Outside, snow began to fall. The snow laid down quiet and thick, blanketing the ridge and softening every sound. It came heavy, not with violence but with the slow, steady certainty of winter taking hold. Abigail stood at the edge of the woodshed, watching flakes drift down over the garden rows now buried and still. The wind had died sometime in the night, leaving the morning hushed. Her breath lingered in front of her as she adjusted the scarf under her coat collar and stepped back toward the cabin. Inside, Jacob was mending the handle of her draw knife. He sat near the hearth, sleeves rolled, the stump of a broken axe half braced against his knee. His concentration was exact, movements deliberate. A strip of rawhide, soaked and pliable, was already wrapped tight around the joint. You've done that before, she said, pulling off her gloves. He didn't look up. My father was a cooper. Taught me how to fix things before I knew how to break them. She folded her coat over the chair. He's still alive? No, she didn't ask how. He set the tool aside and stood, stretching the stiffness out of his shoulders. There's a doe trail behind the bluff. Fresh tracks this morning. If I follow it before noon, I might bring something back. She nodded. You can take my rifle. There's shot left in the tin by the window. His eyes lingered on her face. You trust me with it? I trust you to bring it back. He said nothing, but the quiet between them felt full. He reached for the rifle, checked the chamber, and slung it over his shoulder. As he pulled the door open, she spoke again. Jacob. He turned. If you find one, bring the hide back too. I'll stretch it before the cold settles deeper. He gave a short nod, then stepped into the snow. She gathered her sewing and sat near the window, needle moving through thick wool. She didn't watch the door. She didn't pace, but she kept an open ear for the sound of boots crunching through the frost. By dusk, he hadn't returned. She lit the lamp, fed another log to the stove, and boiled a pot of beans with the last of the smoked pork. The snow outside glowed faintly under the moonlight, and still the path remained empty. She was halfway through darning a pair of socks when the knock came. She opened the door to find him there, cheeks raw from wind, a small doe slung over his back, the rifle balanced easily in one hand. He said nothing at first, just waited for her to move so he could step inside. You're late, she said, unlatching the door wider. She doubled back on me. Let me near the creek before she dropped. The warmth of the room wrapped around them both as he stepped out of his boots and set the rifle against the wall. He lowered the deer near the woodbox and straightened, brushing snow from his cuffs. You're bleeding, she said. He glanced down at his palm. A narrow slice, not deep but fresh. Caught it dressing her. Blade slipped. She took his hand and led him to the basin, her grip light but firm. You're careless when you're cold. I'm better when someone's waiting on me. She washed the cut without comment, wrapped it in clean linen, and tied it off with quick, practiced fingers. You're not the first man I've stitched together, she said, voice low. But I'm the last, aren't I? She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Later, after the deer was hung and the meat cleaned, they sat on the floor near the fire, the warmth of it soft against their faces. The lamp had been turned low, and the only sound was the slow crackle of wood. You ever think about leaving here? He asked, gaze fixed on the flame. I used to. Before Nathan died, we talked about Oregon. He wanted to see the ocean. And you? I would have followed him anywhere. But after he passed, the road didn't feel like a place I belonged. Jacob's voice was quiet. What about now? She looked over at him, her eyes catching the faint gleam of firelight on his jaw. Now I think maybe it's not the road that matters. Maybe it's the person who walks it with you. His breath came slow, steady. I want to stay, Abigail. She didn't turn away. Then stay. He reached out, his hand curling over hers, no hesitation, no request. Just a joining. Her thumb grazed his knuckles, resting there. Outside, the snow kept falling. And inside, the fire didn't go out. The wind shifted in late December, coming down from the high peaks with a bite that warned of deeper winter ahead. The days shortened until morning and evening blurred, and the sky wore the same color from sunup to sundown. The cabin held the heat well enough, but the corners stayed cold, and Abigail had taken to wearing her woolen shawl even indoors. Jacob had patched every draft he could find, replacing warped slats and sealing the eaves above the loft. Still, the cold settled in like an old dog, unwelcome but familiar. That morning, she found him kneeling in the snow near the edge of the tree line, a line of rabbit snares laid out before him. She didn't call to him. Instead, she watched from the porch, arms crossed under her coat. He moved carefully, fingers working at each snare with quiet efficiency, resetting what had been triggered and checking for signs of fox or lynx. When he caught her watching, he didn't wave or call out. He just stood and started toward her, the empty sack slung over his shoulder. You're limping, she said when he reached the steps. He brushed snow from his coat. Slick stone near the creek. Rolled my ankle. It'll pass. You want me to wrap it again? He looked down at his boot, then back at her. Only if you plan on doing it slow. She stepped aside to let him in, hiding the way his words curled warm against her ribs. Inside, she poured hot water into a tin basin and unwrapped a clean strip of muslin. He sat on the stool near the hearth, wordless as she unlaced his boot and rolled his trouser leg up. His skin was red with cold, the swelling just beginning to rise along the ankle bone. You'll need to stay off it for a day or two, she said. You planning to keep me sitting? I'm planning to keep you upright through spring. His eyes lifted to hers. You see us still here by then? Her hands paused, then resumed their work with measured pressure. I do. He exhaled slowly. I wasn't sure if you'd want that. You've been careful not to assume. I had to be. I know what it means to be given space. I know it don't come cheap. She finished tying the muslin and sat back on her heels, meeting his gaze fully. I want you here, Jacob. You've earned your place. He reached out, fingers brushing her cheek. Then I'll stay. That night, she made venison stew with dried beans and a pinch of cloves. After supper, they sat on the floor near the fire, an old quilt folded beneath them. Jacob pulled a carved box from under the cot cedar, bound in wire, with a rusted clasp. This was my mother's, he said, placing it between them. She kept things in here, scraps of letter paper, a locket, a dried bit of rose. After she passed, I carried it with me. Never opened it. Didn't feel right. Abigail ran her fingers along the lid. And now, I want to leave the past where it belongs. Start filling it with something else. He opened the box and pulled out the locket, placing it gently on her palm. Inside was a miniature watercolor, faded and cracked, but still whole. A woman with dark eyes and a gentle mouth. She looks like you, Abigail said. She was kind, he said, but she never got to rest. My father kept her moving, always chasing something. I don't want that for us. Abigail closed the locket and handed it back. Then let's stop chasing. He leaned forward, pressing his forehead gently to hers. Marry me. Her breath caught, but she didn't pull away. Do you mean it? I do. Not for show. Not for the law. For me. For you. For what we're building here. She smiled, eyes misting despite herself. Then yes. They said no vows, no papers signed. But a week later, with snow piled high along the eaves and the fire burning steady, they stood beneath the smoke-darkened rafters and exchanged tokens. She gave him her father's old pocket knife, its bone handle worn smooth. He gave her a leather cord with a silver dollar strung through it, pierced cleanly at the edge. He kissed her slow, reverent, his hands settling at her waist like they'd always belonged there. She rested her forehead against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his breath. The days that followed unfolded with quiet certainty. He built a second shelf in the pantry. She taught him to knit a simple scarf. They read aloud from the worn book of Psalms Nathan had once kept by the bed. When the thaw came early in March, they gathered kindling and boiled sugar from the maples near the ridge. No one came looking. No name was called out in anger. The world, it seemed, had moved on. And so had they. By the time the first crocuses pushed through the thaw-soft earth, Abigail carried new life inside her. She told Jacob late one evening, her fingers curled around his on the porch, the spring breeze threading through her hair. He didn't speak at first, only rested his hand gently over hers, then bent to kiss the inside of her wrist. You gave me a life, he said. Now we make one together. The seasons turned. They planted beans and squash, mended the coop, traded pelts for flour and oil. The cabin grew fuller, not just with things, but with sound, with laughter, with the hush of whispered stories, with footsteps moving through rooms that once echoed hollow. They didn't speak of the past. They didn't need to. Everything that mattered was here now, in each other, in the home they built, one quiet morning at a time.